This past week, Chanel announced that Kendrick is its new face, and we got the photos to prove it. So this is Kendrick rocking the Chanel shades, and he actually gave a really funny quote about why he's modeling glasses. So if you read this quote, and I actually read it in Kendrick's voice, he basically says that because the house only makes women's clothing, that he's going to be modeling the glasses. And Kendrick, if you want to be in high fashion, you got to push the envelope. So I'm hoping that he doesn't let sort of the gender labels distract him from the fact that he can be, much more experimental in the world of high fashion. Like, I think there's some cool things that he could really do. This is a great look for Kendrick. He has been making inroads in high fashion for a while. In fact, in my book, Fashion Killa, How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion, which, by the way, is in stores now, so I'm going to put all the links below. This is the paperback version. In my book, I actually start the book with Kendrick at the Louis Vuitton fashion show. And he's sitting here, he's rapping. It was an homage to Virgil. I talk about his partnership with Tiffany and that crown of thorns, that very iconic crown that he's wearing. And it shows that Kendrick wants to be taken seriously in the world of luxury fashion. By the way he, came into the industry, the way that he was styling himself, I wouldn't say just immediately that he was a fashionista. Like, Kendrick is a rapper's rapper, and I think the rap came first and the fashion, came after the fact, which personally, I think it makes a lot of sense for him. It's much more organic. And with this partnership, what I find so intriguing is not just that it's a high fashion partnership, but specifically Chanel. Chanel, just the name in and of itself, it's very much a heritage fashion brand. This is the French fashion house founded by Coco Chanel. This is the house known for, the quilted handbags, the, boucle suits. Like, that's what it's really about, right? And it's so interesting that by signing Kendrick, not only are they co-signing Kendrick as a rapper, they're also co-signing Not Like Us and the controversy that comes with it. No matter what, Not Like Us is still a record that, based upon who you ask, it can be polarizing. It's the diss record that became a hit record, and now it's this pop culture, just monster record. Not Like Us is undeniable. It's been everywhere from, hip hop to pop culture at large, the Grammys, the Super Bowl halftime show. Now Kendrick and SZA are doing their stadium tour, so it's literally ringing out in stadiums around the country. But for Chanel to co-sign it, I think it also shows that they're embracing the controversy. Right now, Not Like Us is at the heart of Drake's defamation case against Universal Music Group. He's now expanded it to sort of throw accusations against them regarding the Super Bowl and how the halftime show made more and more people fall in love with Not Like Us, and because of that view Drake in a negative light. And I find that so telling that for Chanel to sign this deal, regardless of what's going on in the court system, regardless of what's going on in the court of public opinion, they're really leaning into it. And I think we're going to start to see more high fashion brands, instead of running away from potential controversy, they're going to embrace it. Because at the end of the day, fashion wants to be seen as edgy, new, fresh. It's all about what's next. And I think by playing it too safe, a lot of brands have probably missed out on opportunities, missed out on being a part of the cultural conversation. But I do think it's quite interesting for Chanel specifically because it is a brand that is so mired in heritage. I mean, it's a French brand. So as it is, anytime they had worked with, American artists or American culture was already a deviation. But for them to now embrace Kendrick, someone who just inherently isn't high fashion, so someone who, kind of comes from the outside and is also in the midst of this controversial but incredibly exciting pop culture moment, I think is very revealing. And it might show some of the moves that Chanel as a company are planning to do in the future. But this isn't the first time that Chanel has embraced hip hop. In my book, Fashion Killa, How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion, I have a whole chapter that begins with 1991. 1991 was a seminal year for high fashion because Chanel, as well as other lines like Isaac Mizrahi and Charlotte Nouveau, they put on the runway what they called their hip hop collections. I'm going to share some of the photos from that collection. But this is when Karl Lagerfeld, like the famous creative director who, basically became a celebrity in and of himself, he was so inspired by hip hop and what he deemed to be hip hop fashion. He put these designs on the runway. So you're seeing, backwards baseball caps, the famous Chanel handbag, but done in like this metallic gold, a lot of accessories, a lot of gold chains, nameplates, like all of these things that he was pulling from hip hop, what he felt was hip hop culture. Now, as I talk about in my book, this was a very controversial move at the time. So I'm going to read from my book. It's the nouveau rap look. That's what Karl Lagerfeld said of his vision. And at the time, this is what Vogue says. Lagerfeld is deliberately provocative, taking his Chanel show to the edge of an abyss of kitsch and funk. Now, this is what an executive from a retail store said. It's young, colorful, taken right from the street fashion scene. Now, that's all very complimentary, but this is what another retailer said. How many women are going to wear a silver cat suit? Fair enough. I mean, right now, it would probably be millions. But back then, the Chanel customer, they just didn't understand why would this be the 1991 collection. The other aspect that was discussed even back in 1991 with the Chanel show was the line between appreciation and appropriation. Karl Lagerfeld is inspired by hip hop. He's putting it on his high fashion runway and also putting a high fashion price tag. But if the kids who actually created those styles, if they dress like that, society wasn't viewing them as high fashion or upscale. It was actually the converse. And those styles of, the baggy silhouettes and the baseball caps, sneakers, that was actually viewed as a form of rebellion, criminality. I mean, these are things I get into my book. But I wanted to share this one quote that I thought was really telling. So this is from Denise Burrows. She was a buyer for the Ebony Fashion Fair. And this is what she said. When Black kids were wearing a lot of gold chains, they were condemned by society. But then Lagerfeld does the same thing for rich women and he is applauded. There is a double standard here. And that's something that throughout my book in Fashion Killa, which really is a 50-year retrospective of hip hop and high fashion, it's something that the fashion industry still grapples with today. Where is the line between embracing an artist, embracing a culture, a cultural movement, but then distancing yourself from certain aspects that may not be palatable or may not be commercial or financially viable? In fact, I was recently interviewed by the New York Times when A$AP Rocky was on trial for assault, and the interviewer was asking me, how does it feel that high fashion brands, because obviously Rocky was like head to toe, super dripped out when he was on his way to court, where going to the courtroom almost seems like a runway. And what does that mean when these high fashion lines are not just posting these photos of Rocky, they're tagging themselves, but the journalist told me that some of these like luxury brands are even sending out press releases like, this is the coat Rocky wore, or he's wearing our blazer. And what I said in that interview is, for brands, you got to take the good with the bad, the highs and the lows. If you're going to work with an artist, whether they be a rapper or any person, you have to understand you can't just take them for their height, and you can't just try to like bottle their essence and they're cool when it's convenient to you. So if a brand wants to be a true partner, then I think they have to lean into it. So I do find it, really interesting that that's what happened with Rocky. After he was acquitted, he got, the Ray-Ban deal was announced. He's the face of Dior. And then you look at somebody like Kendrick, and, I'm not drawing a parallel between the two artists, but he is still mired in controversy in many facets. And Chanel is into it. Like, they see that as, not just an accessory, but that's really like the main fit. Like they want to be affiliated with everything Kendrick Lamar is doing. The rapper, the creative, the provocateur, like however you want to see it. And I think that could be sort of a compass of where they're going in the future. Aside from the 1991 show, Chanel has had relationships with different artists, notably Pharrell did a capsule collection with them. But I think Karl Lagerfeld specifically was just someone who loves celebrities. So he's the person who discovered Kimora Lee Simmons. Like she was his muse when I think she was like 14 or 15, walking the Chanel show, closing the Chanel show. And he's someone who's always had his eye on what's new, what's next. I know Nicki Minaj worked with him when she did her Fendi collaboration. So I think Lagerfeld was really good about having his finger on the cultural pulse. And I mean, it got to a point where I think even rappers knew who he was and they wanted to take photos with him. They wanted to be seen with him. So I wonder now that he's no longer here, he's passed away, Chanel is probably trying to find what its footing is when it comes to this celebrity world. We're also in a different era where every brand wants to work with celebrities. So in an oversaturated place, how do you stand out? And I think Chanel's really smart to work with Kendrick because he's not someone who just signs with every brand. And the brands he's worked with, such as like a Tiffany, for example, or Louis Vuitton, they're also very luxury. These are the heritage brands. He's not someone who's aligning himself with kind of like the bargain basement brands or the here today, gone today kind of brands. So I think just as a fashionista and even, of course, as an artist, Kendrick represents quality. There's a timelessness in his music. I mean, look, he's the first rapper to win a Pulitzer. Like, he's that guy. And I think that's why it makes such a good fit. If Chanel had just gone with like the biggest artist, who has the most followers, the most streams, I think it would have felt really inorganic, like they're just kind of chasing the wave. Here it feels like a partnership with someone who values quality over quantity. They're timeless, they're a classic, and that's why Kendrick Lamar and Chanel makes a lot of sense. And look, if Kendrick's halftime show in those like flared Celine jeans are any indication, people want to dress like this guy. So I think he is someone that the fashion industry is looking at. Definitely, although he speaks sort of like for the everyman, I think there is also this aspirational quality about him. Like I said, like this classicness, he is like a classic man in that sense. So I do think that, he could probably get young people and consumers to start thinking about investing in classic pieces, building out your actual a wardrobe versus just following the trends, following fast fashion. Like I think he could sort of help with, millennials, Gen Z, almost changing that psychology of how we dress. So I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities, exciting opportunities, and I can't wait to see what Kendrick has on next. What do you think about Kendrick Lamar being the face of Chanel? Not like us. I'm sure Karl Lagerfeld will love that song. If you follow the old Chanel fashion shows, he was all about big and crazy and extravagant. I could totally see him just blaring that song to close the show. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't, make sure to pick up my book, Fashion Killa: How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion. The book is available in hardcover and paperback. And as I'm talking to a lot of people, they really love the paperback. It feels really nice. But if you want to know more about hip hop and Chanel, or hip hop and just high fashion and the relationship that rappers have had with brands like Chanel over the past 50 years, make sure you pick the book up. I'm going to have links down below.